Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety in Canada podcast. I'm your host, Marianne Baton. The aim of this podcast is to have practical knowledge about what psychological health and safety is, how to use it, how to keep it going in your workplace. And each week I'll have really interesting guests from across Canada and even beyond who will share their strategies with us on how we can do things better and do it differently. So my guest for today is Mark Ferrant. He is the CEO and president of the Canadian Jurors Commission, and I think you're going to be really interested to hear what he has to share. So, Mark, can you start with telling me a little bit about what the Canadian Juries Commission is and why you're part of that?
Thank you. So the Canadian Juries Commission is a national not-for-profit organization that represents and supports Canadians on jury duty and coroner's inquests. So we represent their interests as a group in speaking with actors within the justice system and judicial community and public safety community. We work with employers, we work with organizations, healthcare providers, the entire spectrum to improve jury duty, to promote jury duty. We work with educators and we work with diverse community organizations and the Indigenous community as well to improve representation on jury duty and to promote diversity on juries. We were founded in 2019 following our appearance as individuals at the House of Commons Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights, when in 2017 they conducted a lengthy study on jury duty mental health and jury duty as a whole. And coming out of that session, they produced a landmark report with 11 recommendations to improve jury duty. And some of those recommendations were taken up, one in the form of a bill, which we'll probably get to later in our talk. But a lot of those recommendations kind of sat there. And so the individuals who appeared at the committee, including subject matter experts, decided to give life to those recommendations by forming an organization that would actually do the work. And rather than have a report sit on a shelf, we said, nobody's going to do this work. These are very sound recommendations, which everyone appreciates. So we founded the commission, and we've been off to the races ever since in terms of developing programs directly within the community, but also working with provinces and territories and the federal government as a whole and the judiciary to give life to those recommendations and to build programs.
I'm so with you, Mark, that it's policy is important. Recommendations, research reports, all of those are important. But unless we actually take action and make change, then they're just dust collectors. So I'm really glad to see that there's people like yourself who say, no, we're going to do more than talk about it. We're going to actually make change. So why you? Why you in particular?
It's a great question. I ask myself that sometimes too. So I was a juror. I served on a jury in 2014 on a graphic first-degree murder trial that really changed my life. I'm not the same person coming out of that courtroom as I was going in. And that sadly is the case for some jurors who are exposed to graphic evidence in gruesome cases, which we'll get to in our discussion. And my advocacy work really began when I realized that supports weren't available to me at the time when I needed them. When I came to the conclusion that I was feeling something unusual and that my recovery post-trial was not happening, and that my own mental health was being impacted and being impacted significantly. And so, as doors were closed and access wasn't there, I took it upon myself to really bring this issue forward. And I started to advocate and lobby as an individual. And
Yeah.
as I started to do that, I was hearing the stories of other jurors from cases from decades ago, from recent cases, who, like me, had experienced ill mental health, but a lack of support, a significant lack of support, and then all with very different stories too, on similar stories as well, but different stories on how they were impacted. So some were impacted in the workplace, some were impacted at home and the workplace. Some with really debilitating ill mental health, and sadly some substance abuse issues, and all of the things that come from a lack of sustained direct support and coping mechanisms. And jurors are really interesting because in Canada there's a secrecy rule in place. Jurors aren't allowed to vocalize publicly anything to do with the trial, unlike in the US, which has sort of open justice. Jurors in Canada don't have that privilege, and so you suffer in silence as a result of that. And so that's where my advocacy began, and why I've taken this mission on.
That's great. And I shared with you, Mark, that one of my family members served on a juror probably 30 years ago and was haunted by it for a long, long time. I don't know whether or not they would have been diagnosed as having PTSD, but certainly having those flashbacks and thinking about it and hearing the voices of the victims, and how that had that long-term impact. And so again, this is why I am so thrilled with what you're doing. And I just want for our listeners to sort of put this in context. What has this got to do with psychological health and safety in the workplace?
So jury duty is a civic duty, and for the countries around the world that share the jury system, it's probably very similar in most jurisdictions in the fact that jury duty is mandatory. In Canada, at least, it's the last mandatory civic duty left in our society. Voting is on a voluntary basis. It's not mandatory. We don't conscript for the military anymore. And paying your taxes is mandatory, but that happens really as a routine behind the scenes. The only action that is mandatory and has a legal ramification attached to it when you're summoned is jury duty. And you're asked to step outside of your anything that is happening in your life at that time. If you're summoned, you're stepping outside of work, you're stepping outside of commitments, you're stepping outside of your family to uptake this very important role in our society. And it is an important role, and it's one that we have to cherish and maintain. The rights of an individual to a fair trial, and the right of an individual to be tried by a jury of their peers. That's founded within our Constitution and founded within our criminal code. The reason it's important for workplaces to understand this is that jury duty isn't a vacation. It's not time away from the office. It's not a break from the routine. It's not stepping out and having fun. It's a really important undertaking and a significant one. And sadly, workplaces have really not been as supportive of jury duty and jurors, their employees, as they could be.
And there's a couple of things that you shared with me, Mark. One was the stigma in the workplace and how that plays out. Another is the fear of job loss. And the other is just the stress of walking away from your job and what that does to people. So for each of those components that you shared with me, can you sort of speak to what you wish was done differently in these regards?
Mm-hmm. So as you said, there's some individuals are pre-stigmatized arriving in court once they've been selected. And even before then, when the summons arrives at home and you open your mail and see that it's a jury duty summons, and you take that to your employer and you say, listen, it looks like I've been summoned to come to court. I haven't been selected yet. the conversations we've had with jurors and some of the data that we've collected through focus groups, the employer's reaction is not positive, and it's not supportive, and it's not understanding. In some cases, it's actually hostile and extremely negative. How are you going to get out of this? You can't be selected. You've got to find a way to not get selected. And to put that pressure down on somebody and to diminish the important role that they're about to undertake in that individual's minds is entirely the wrong message. We as a society, we have supported public health amid this terrible pandemic that we're living in now. We owe the same degree of support and commitment to jury duty, which will be there long past the pandemic as part of our fabric. And so I wish employers, when an employee or a direct report brings that summons letter forward, they immediately say, okay, this is going to happen. We'll support you. And the conversation begins there in terms of how this is going to impact your work and your leave from the office. And in many cases, it's, we've got your back. Go and do your duty. Your work will be here when you return. That's the ideal. And that's a very easy thing for a lot of corporations to do, and to have that conversation in place. Many corporations have those arrangements already in their apparatus, but in some cases, there's a disconnect between what's on the website and what's actually happening on the ground floor.
Right. They haven't communicated the behaviors to the frontline leaders who respond to the employees.
That's exactly it. And so, we have these conversations with significant employers to say, wait a minute, we pay our employees salaries, and we don't cut them off, and we maintain benefits, and we have jury duty on our website. Look, there's 2 lines about jury duty. And you say, well, and you applaud, obviously, for maintaining salaries and wages. That's important. But there's not a lot of information there, enough for an employee to make a sound decision and feel confident. And there's so much more work to do there. And then, as you said, that message and that communication is not transposed down to the manager or people department or HR who are working with individuals. It's not there at all. And so we have to educate. And then obviously, accepting that summons and being selected is a shock to a lot of jurors. So a lot of people don't expect to actually be selected. So coming to court is one thing, and sitting in the courtroom as part of the public, waiting for, the arraignment and the charge. But then many don't think that they're going to move past that point, and they're shocked when they are. And then it becomes very real. So there again, the employer would be a great place. The workplace would be a great place to continue that discussion, to say, we've got your back, and you're going to be okay, and this is important to do, and to continue that reassurance at that point.
I'm thinking about 2 things, Mark. One is that when we expect something challenging to happen, we are much less likely to be traumatized by it than when we're blindsided, when it's something that's unexpected. And that is true with anything that employers know that their employees might be exposed to, whether it's the really negative person calling into a call center, whether it is somebody coming in off the streets to a library where the librarian has to deal with someone who's impaired. So that expectation is really important. But you mentioned something else that is a real stressor for people, because yes, there are some employers who will pay your wages while you're at jury duty, but that's not the law. And it's also not that common, is it?
That's correct. It's not the law. In fact, in Canada, only one province, Newfoundland and Labrador, has where it's the law that employers must maintain salaries, and wages and benefits. The rest of the country, it's not the law at all. You cannot be fired from serving on a jury. And even that is interesting. So that's a provincial law, though. That's not federal. But employers are not obligated to maintain salaries or wages. And so a lot of large corporations and public sector employers and those with collective bargaining in place and collective agreements in place do have that provision. But, we're a country of entrepreneurs and small and medium-sized businesses. And there's a disconnect. So an employee might, accept a summons, not really understanding what the law is and understanding the repercussions. And some justices, you're given the opportunity rightfully to be excused from jury duty. And you can use financial hardship as a reason to be excused. And no justice would accept a juror who has expressed that this would be a financial hardship. But if you haven't done that, and it's not necessarily your fault, but if you haven't expressed that and you're selected, your employer is not obligated to maintain your wages. And it's very difficult to be removed at that point once you've been selected and you're in trial. And let's say it's a month in and you're only receiving jury pay, or you're moved to short-term leave or short-term disability, which is a classification that some employers would do at that point. So many people live from paycheck to paycheck. That's a significant decline in your income. And jury pay does not meet the loss of one's wages or income. It's not an income replacement.
Yeah, that just adds to the stress.
Mm-hmm.
So without us triggering our listeners with details of cases, can you share some of the reactions, some of the responses that jurors have? And I know it goes all the way up to post-traumatic stress disorder, but what are some of the other responses that are common for people who serve on juries?
Well, it's like a meter, it goes up as the trial progresses. And again, it depends on the trial. Some cases are, obviously graphic evidence, disturbing evidence is obvious to a lot of people. But it's very different when you're sitting in it. So it's much different than watching something on television or reading about it in the newspaper, or looking at it online. When you're in court and you're subjected to the reality of that this is a crime that is committed, there is a victim or a series of victims. They have died graphically, violently. And you're going through that evidence routinely and systematically. You're also not in control of the evidence. So the evidence is being presented to you. The juror has no ability to turn the evidence off, to pause it. And they might be going over that evidence in great detail. So if it's a coroner on the stand going through each and every aspect of it at length, and then the Crown bringing it back up, that's difficult. In assault cases, those are also very, very difficult because you have both the victim and the accused in the courtroom together, and so and that has an extra degree of burden on the jury because there's a living, breathing victim in the room. There might be multiple victims in the room. That's difficult, and without getting really graphic, cases involving children are extremely difficult, extremely difficult. And I've spoken to jurors in those cases, and that adds an extra layer of grief and the like on a juror, especially someone who might have a family of their own or children of their own. That's another difficult layer.
Mark, we know that when we're talking about any professional, whether it's a firefighter, police officer, a healthcare professional, or a grocery store clerk or the librarian, that when they are exposed to traumatic incidents, violent incidents, that it can be life altering. And one of the things that I'm hoping that you'll share with this audience is some of the things that the individuals can do to prepare to deal with difficult things in life, because any of us could. And also those tips and strategies, besides being receptive when somebody gets called for jury duty, that employers might be able to do to help prevent the worst impact, but help prepare people.
Thank you for the question. It's jury duty isn't a vocation. So there isn't a training manual. Jurors aren't trained in advance. In some cases, they may not even be given warnings that there's going to be graphic evidence. And sadly, most of the actors in the courtroom, the judge, the counsel, sheriffs and constables who look after jurors and manage them on a day-to-day basis, there's a layer of professional desensitization that's happened among those individuals because they've been in this role for decades, maybe their whole professional lives. So they don't think that the jury is going to be impacted by certain imagery or certain testimony because it rolls off their backs. That's not to say that those professions aren't affected, because they are. We know they are. And we know that justices are. But jurors are a different group, because for some, they've never been in court in their entire lives. They've never had any interactions with the justice system at all. So this is very new for them. As employers, we have a responsibility when we recognize that our colleagues are going to be taking on this role to make them aware of the benefits and programs that may exist already in the workplace. So the fact that there is an EAP program, that there is the ability to access support after the trial. It's important for employers to also not double duty in their employees when they're serving. Certainly some jurors would say, I want to continue to do my work when I get home at night. I want to keep my projects going. That's a conversation to have one-on-one, but certainly, the ideal is to say, focus on what you're doing, focus on the task at hand, and don't worry about work. Work will be here when you get back. We've got your back, and it's being managed, and you don't need to worry about it. Conversations can happen around that. Self-care and resiliency and those types of instructions should be given to employees as well. Simple self-care routines and the like, to get them through those moments and to get them through the case and to the other side. Because
we know some of the basic self-care, like have enough water and eat nutritious food and move. But what would you say are the self-care strategies that are most important to folks who are required to do jury duty?
Well, important to try not to dwell on the information and dwell on the case that they're sitting on. Come home at night, try and listen to some music, do something that is not related to what you did in court, and understanding that, when jurors are released at the end of the day, some are coming back home because they're not sequestered, and typically at that point. You may be coming home to very active family life and the routines of home life and the like. But it's important to take some time for yourself, and to try and de-escalate and calm as much as possible, so that you can come back in the next day. And you're not responsible for the facts. That's really important. And you don't typically hear that in court. You're not responsible for the evidence that's being collected. You're a judge of the facts. And you're also, we'll get to this perhaps a little later, but, you're not responsible for the verdict, in the sense that so many jurors feel guilt and remorse and the like from not delivering a verdict, that the public desires, a lower verdict. That's not, not to feel guilty about that. You're actually doing your job. That is the role. You're a judge of the evidence and the judge of the facts, and the facts didn't meet a conviction. But part of the work that we're doing is also to ensure that there are the right supports there for jurors. So as an organization, we're trying to get those supports in place for the jury through the courts and through the attorney generals and the ministries of justice that own and manage the jury process. And so having those adequate supports in place after the trial are really important for jurors, in the same way that we have supports for first responders, for police officers, for veterans who go through traumatic events and have a recovery plan on the other side. We have to have the same approach with the jury.
What I love about that, Mark, is that many of the people on juries, because they're in jobs where there is no employee assistance plan, or they may be small business owners or entrepreneurs, as you said, that you're looking at providing this for them, even though they don't have the coverage. And I think that's so important. But I wanted to comment on another piece, though, because it just ties so beautifully to the research, again, about post-traumatic stress disorder, that if we believe that we coulda, shoulda, would have done something different, that we're somehow to blame for contributing to the tragedy or the trauma that we witnessed, we are more likely to have PTSD. And what you're saying is all you're doing is looking at the facts. You're not responsible for what facts are presented. You are really setting the context that is protective for the jurors. And, again, when we go back to psychological health and safety, I do understand what you're saying, that being a juror isn't a vocation, but in many vocations, we may be trained to do the job, but we're not trained to manage the emotional reactions that we have to what we experience on the job. And the fact that you have gone this far to understand that mindset and to prepare them for it is amazing, and will probably save many people from that really poor experience. So how do you get in front of the jurors before they start?
Well, that's a great question. That's a great question. The justice system, part of its role is to ensure that jurors aren't opinionated. And so that you come into the case and the trial clean, in the sense that you don't have a lot of perspective on the accused, on the crime itself. Some cases are high profile. You might have heard about it, but again, haven't formed an opinion, and you're neutral on it. And that same belief and expectation amongst the jury is kind of superseded by the justice system, which again doesn't want to fully prepare and provide a lot of information about process and the like for jury members prior to the trial. So it's a challenge for sure. That's why we're trying to put as much emphasis on the post events of jury duty. So when you've delivered your verdict and you're being excused, rather than just picking up your bags and being shoved out the door, which unfortunately is happening now. So we went through the stresses of jury duty. Deliberation is one of the most significant events in the trial. It is the most significant event in the trial for the jury. And when we talk to jurors, that's where they really feel that stress and anxiety and ownership, because they're delivering the verdict. They're delivering the passing judgment on somebody's life. And they're also passing, they're passing judgment on a case that might set precedent. They're also delivering justice to the victims, and that's in the background too. And that's why, after the verdict is read, instead of, pack your bags and get out, we're encouraging courts, the judges themselves, the sheriffs, to debrief the jury, to go through those steps on, not owning the verdict and not being responsible for the facts, and to prepare them for the rest of their lives, really walking out of that courtroom, so that people aren't walking around with that sense of guilt and remorse and just that awful penetration that it has on your sense of self, so that you can live with the consequences of the verdict. And there are challenging cases, no doubt about it. But you shouldn't have to live with the consequences of that case for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. And we're really fortunate that these discussions are being heard, and that the courts and the provinces and territories are starting to do something about it.
And who pays for this, Mark? Who's covering these services so that our jurors are mentally healthier, psychologically safer?
So we're obviously really pleased with our advocacy that Ontario, Saskatchewan, and BC adopted post-trial support mental health programs for jurors. So those are called the jury duty support programs in those provinces. They're in those three in particular are underpinned by an EAP provider that already has a contract in place with the province as part of the employee assistance programs that are available to the public service. And so that program in particular is paid for by the Ministry of the Attorney General in each of those provinces. So jurors in Ontario and Saskatchewan and BC have access to 4 counseling sessions after their trial. They are in Ontario, there's an option for an additional 8. While we're obviously really pleased with those programs, it's in our belief, it's a start. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't stop there, and we shouldn't suddenly say, well, they've got counseling in place and that's it. Because as you may know, and anyone listening who's gone through therapy and counseling, 4 sessions for many people is barely enough time to unpack the problem itself and to give a label to it, even diagnosis, so to speak, let alone the coping mechanisms and the strategies to move forward and beyond. And so, and is an EAP provider really the right vehicle to deliver that program? So, we're obviously very grateful that the programs are there and that jurors have some degree of support, but we really feel that the EAP may not be the best long-term solution and the best long-term provider, that it should maybe move to a clinical setting, like in Ontario, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health would be the right clinical evidence-based solution and provider to manage trauma, because is an EAP really trauma informed to the degree that the jury are experiencing trauma?
Yeah, so it's a good point. And all EAPs are not the same. They don't deliver the same services or have the same level. But I do agree that it's a great starting point. And if they can offer triage where they assess where the person's at and what they need, then it's an excellent start. I'm thinking, though, Mark, that what would be wonderful is some sort of resource that says you've been called for jury duty and that it actually talks to them about setting expectations, about what their reactions might be, about the fact that it's not their responsibility to deal with more than the facts that are presented with them. Do you have any plans to create something like that?
We do, actually. So one of the recommendations, in fact, I think it was the first recommendation in the House of Commons Justice Committee report many years ago, was providing more information to jurors. So many jurors that we've talked to have said that one of the most paralyzing pieces was the complete lack of information about jury duty and expectations. Finding it was a problem as well. So, you know, a lot of provinces will say, well, we have a website and it's all there, but finding it and navigating to it and then going through that information is a task. And then again, it may not be meaningful, right? It may not be written in the right way. It's an old set of information. So we are, the Canadian Juries Commission is developing a digital application that will provide all of the available common law and information about jury duty in the province in which you reside in. It will provide, you know, just simply by setting your area, it will reconfigure to describe, you know, jury pay when it comes into place, your employer's rights and responsibilities, your rights and responsibilities, and some very common sense information about jury duty itself and setting expectations and again, not to opinionate anyone, but to set the stage for jury duty. Critical to the app too is some very simple mental health, first aid, and self-care tools in the app itself that you can use throughout the trial in place of supports. And so we've wireframed the app and we're building it. We just need to get the resources to take it to the last stage.
So when you say to get the resources, you're looking for funding to help with this?
That would be funding. Yeah, that would be funding.
And will it be available in the public domain when it's done, or is it something that would be sold?
No, it would be free. Absolutely. Yeah. We don't want anyone to have to pay for it. It would be free. It would be, ideally, it would be on the Apple App Store. It would be on Google Play and any other apparatus that supports a smartphone. In England, for example, in Wales, they have a very extensive information kit that is provided to jurors prior to their service. So as part of the summons package, you get a 3-page booklet on jury duty and what it is, what are the rules, what are the responsibilities, dress code, these types of things that people have questions about. You know, what do I have to wear on the first day? And England does that very well. England does not have jury pay and does not support, so it's, but they might be doing very well in one facet, but not so well in the others. And then in the US, it's kind of, it's all, each state is very different in terms of what they provide and what they don't provide. But we really feel like this is an opportunity for Canada to show leadership, and a digital application. Why would we print paper anymore that somebody's going to lose when we can just put it on one of these and have it at your fingertips? And again, it's not information that's going to opinionate. It's common law that's already out there, publicly available now. Let's just synthesize it and put it in a meaningful way that somebody can use.
Yeah, it sounds like something that's quite important that could be helpful for a lot of people. So I want to synthesize here, Mark, and I want you to correct me, fill in the gaps. But from an employer's point of view, we want to make sure that when an employee announces that they've been summoned for jury duty, that our leaders know how to respond in a way that is supportive and in a way that honors the civic responsibility that is jury duty, rather than stigmatizing it as something that we should wrangle out of. that as employers, we, especially those that are already trauma informed, that we can help prepare our employees for the possibility of being exposed to traumatic or graphic information, and talk to them about the resources that we already have available to them, but also about things that they can do themselves, including access to your resources. And that if we're an individual that is called to jury duty, that we really should prepare. We shouldn't just go thinking it's an adventure, but that it could be something that we need to be mentally and emotionally prepared for. What have I missed?
That's it. Absolutely. And it's supporting the individual in the outset. And it's important to say, we have your back and you have our full support. We're here for you. And again, expressing how important it is to serve on a jury. And there should be a video on the company website that with the senior leadership talking directly to their employees about serving on a jury and why it's important and why this company supports it and why we're here for you. And that's why we're, as an organization, building toolkits and resources, and that's part of our planning to deliver toolkits and resources to companies that they can put on their website very easily that supports that messaging. The ROI of investing in jury duty is like any other ROI investing in mental health. It has dividends and pays dividends by, again, showing and demonstrating to your employees that you're committed to them. By committing and supporting jury duty, you're committing to retention, and you're committing to an improved employee engagement score at your office. Your internal metrics will reflect that. Not supporting it and having employees experience ill mental health and then retaliation and continued hostility after the event is entirely the wrong message, and will pay negative dividends. Mm-hmm. And so toolkits for workplaces and toolkits for HR and people managers to ensure that the all of the right programs are in place to support employees and staff on jury duty. Toolkits to managers in terms of how do we reintegrate our employee when they come back into work after being on a case for 6 months or 11 months, and it being one that has changed that individual. How do we reintegrate them, and what are the rules for checking in on an employee midway through a trial? What are the do's and don'ts? Because there are legal repercussions here in terms of how, contacting someone and the like. And then a toolkit for employees themselves. What are your rights? What are your responsibilities and the like, so they know and we can set the expectations there in terms of their own well-being, and so that they know how to respond the right way if they are being bullied in the office by a people manager or another coworker about their jury service, because sadly it happens. And I've heard far too many cases of former jurors who've been re-victimized by their workplace significantly. I can't imagine why an employer would use jury duty on a performance review as a way to punish an individual because of having served on a case and then not knowing that this case was that detrimental. So that person is experiencing significant ill mental health from their courtroom experience, and then they're experiencing additional stress and anxiety and perhaps further impacting their mental health, because every day they come into an office where they're being harassed It's entirely the wrong message.
Yes, for sure. Do you know what you're making me think about, Mark? When we started doing work around mental illness, we realized that at that time, the pandemic's changed everything, but at that time, there was only about 8% of employees on average who were experiencing mental ill health at any given time. And so from an employer's perspective, it was a minority and they weren't really focused on it. We shifted to say, let's talk about the mental health and psychological protection of everybody, because then the employer has a bigger investment, more reason to look at it. And I'm thinking with what you're talking about with jury duty, really what we're talking about is building resilience in order to be able to deal with traumatic events, and also to create a culture of psychological safety so that anybody coming back from any incident isn't going to be bullied. And so I think this is a beautiful way for us to tie this together, that a psychologically healthy and safe workplace would naturally want to build resilience and protect people who are called for jury duty. It wouldn't have to be a one-off. But by you shining a light on this particular issue, it helps have another point of reference for those who want to take action and to understand why it matters. So I thank you for that. Any last thoughts, ideas, strategies that you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, it's important to recognize, while some individuals experience ill mental health and ill after effects of serving on a jury, for others, it is an extremely rewarding experience. And it's one that people come out of really feeling that they contributed to their community, really contributed to the justice system. And it is for many one of the most impactful experiences of their lives. They may have never again do something like this again. And so that's the right outcome, to feel emboldened by it, and to take that message and communicate it to friends and family and colleagues. That strengthens the bond with our justice system. Sadly, though, for others, it was more challenging and it was more difficult because of all of the things that we talked about. And it's important to know that, like any mental health journey, a mental health journey doesn't necessarily begin the day you've been excused from jury duty. Like anything else, sometimes it takes time for individuals to realize that they need to do something about their mental health, and that could take a year. That could take much longer than 2 months after the trial or 3 months after the trial. Sadly, some of these EAP programs have a timestamp on them, which says you have to access it within 3 months after the service, or you're done. And anyone would say, we don't put a time limit on mental health, right? We don't start a clock and expect you to respond. It's a journey, and for many, the journey could take a long time. That's why we need to make sure these supports are there when you need them. And also that we're supporting you throughout the journey and throughout the experience, and providing you with information that you can use and is beneficial to you throughout that experience. But certainly that's where an employer can say, again, our programs are available to you, because jury duty is not classified as a workplace injury. It's not like falling down on the job or even being injured in a vehicular accident outside of the office. You're still under the fold of your employee benefits and health benefits, and jury duty sits outside that. So it's a psychological injury, but it's not classified in any sort of workplace compensation framework. That's why it's so important that we look after jurors to the best of our abilities.
That's great. Now, if somebody wants to reach out, they want to help, or maybe even if somebody says, hey, I want to fund this whole thing for you, how do they get in touch with you, Mark?
Well, I'm on Twitter at CDN Jury Help. The Canadian Jury Commission is also on Twitter at Canada Jury. Our website is under construction, so bear with us. We're getting it back online, but CanadianJuriesCommission.ca is where to find us, and you can always reach me via email at m.ferrant@rogers.com.
That's great. Thank you. So just so everybody knows, you'll be able to watch the video of this podcast on the Flourish DX YouTube channel, and short clips will show up on our LinkedIn pages. And you can connect with myself through LinkedIn if you want to continue this discussion. And I know, Mark, you're on LinkedIn as well, correct?
I am on LinkedIn as well.
Okay, so thank you so much for your time. This is fascinating. It so well dovetails with everything that we talk about in terms of psychological health and safety, but especially about helping prevent the worst effects of trauma. So thanks, Mark.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.